Hello, I'm Dr. David Johnson, Professor of Medicine and Chief of Gastroenterology at Eastern Virginia Medical School, and welcome back to Digestive Disease Week Highlights. This is part 2 from Chicago 2023. I've done part 1 to look back at that, and now pick up on the same theme of doing 30,000-foot snippets, if you will, just on the topics. You can research the articles that I'll provide in the reference list here for you to get more specifics, but I wanted to give you some take-home messages just to tweak your interest. First is looking at the diagnosis of early colon cancer and following up by a SEER database over extended period of time. The authors of this first discussion looked at development of a second cancer, and by age 70, the cumulative risk of a second cancer for men was 19.7%, 18.4% for women, and a cumulative second cancer of the colon was 6.5% for men and 4.5% for women. This means 1 in 6 diagnosed with early stage 0 to 3. With colorectal cancer, we'll have a second cancer. What does this mean? I think it means that we should be much more aggressive and dynamic and persistent in oncogenetic testing. My personal reflection on this is they should be all seen by a geneticist and appropriate monitoring depending on what we see. Certainly, we find things well beyond just Lynch syndrome in these early onset colon cancer. Other cancer surgery related type of effects was one that caught my eye was bariatric surgery, decreases the risk of developing cancer. Looking at cancers that are increased, in particular in the obese population, they found that there was a significant reduction as it relates to the patients with cancers, particularly the GI and GYN axis, and as well as breast and thyroid. But bariatric surgery had a significant risk reduction, nearly 40 to 60% risk reduction as it relates to bariatric surgery. So another reason to look at bariatric surgery in a very favorable way. A couple studies on the IBD, in particular for ileocecal Crohn's, and this is looking at the treatment paradigms. One was looking at the resection versus a biologic as the index treatment. And the resection, when patients were followed out for 5 years, in the absence of any type of anti-TNF treatment, 50% were still off their treatment. 47.5% were on an immunomodulator, and approximately 17% were on anti-TNF. So maybe a primary role for ileocecal resection. A second study from Italy looked at this observation versus prophylactic immunosuppression with ileocecal resection with isolated Crohn's disease in that area, beginning anti-TNF immediately after surgery or observation and induction based on mucosal aberrations seen at the time of follow-up colonoscopy beginning at 6 months. And they found the same for outcomes as it relates to 12 and 24 months. So we do see that maybe that just observation of these patients and aggressively resurveying them, looking for deep remission by macroscopic criteria, may be the emerging norm. Another study that was looking at the use of subcutaneous infliximab with the maintenance therapy for Crohn's disease. As you may know, in Europe, it's approved for IBD, among other indications. But Dr. Steve Hanauer presented this in patients that were successfully in remission after initial induction, moderately severe active Crohn's disease, week 54, clinical remission, endoscopic response as the primary endpoints. And basically, they were much better in the patients who received sub-Q infliximab. Again, far better PK/PD data, not presented in this study, but looking at the literature. And the response rate was greater, 50% in the active subcutaneous administration, and only 17.9% in the placebo. So again, we'll see what the FDA does with this, potentially a new way to administer infliximab. Next was one that was very exciting. It was a recellularization via electroporation therapy. And this is Dr. Jacques Bergman from Holland, looking at the use of a endoscopic 1-hour procedure where they did a duodenal mucosal delivery of electric fields. This creates apoptosis and it allows the cells to, again, repopulate, and renewal of the cells seems to preserve tissue structure, allowing better insulin response. And this is something that the de novo insulin response. So they took a single-arm study, 14 patients that were type 2 diabetes, and they followed these people. The primary endpoint at 6 months was off insulin entirely, and a hemoglobin 1AC less than 7.5%. And at 6 months, a significant improvement. 86% were off insulin entirely. And they all showed improvements in glycemic control. So again, very exciting 1-hour procedure. We'll see where this goes in continued follow-up. 2 studies as it relates to cirrhotics and muscle mass and nutrition. Sarcopenia, we know, is very prevalent in patients, and certainly a deterioration delisting is the number one reason that patients get delisted from transplant protocols because of sarcopenia. Two studies, one from India that looked at the dynamic interplay of using nutritional therapy with a 30 to 35 kilocalorie per kilogram per day and a 1 to 1.5 grams of vegetable protein kilogram per day, and looking at this and looking at the endpoints at 6 months, a dynamic improvement as it relates to minimization of sarcopenia. Again, another study from Thailand did basically the same thing, but now used branched chain amino acid addition, and as well as the home-based strengthening exercises. Both of these showed remarkable reductions in sarcopenia. What does it mean? Well, I think we are doing a relatively poor job overall in our cirrhotic patients. We can be much more aggressive as far as nutritional and home strengthening exercises, get a dietitian involved, but we can do much better as well as prevention of sarcopenia or minimizing the progression towards that. Next was a study from Dr. Ji Bang and her colleagues looking at the multi-center evaluation of what's the best approach for infected necrotizing pancreatitis. Certainly the standard has been transluminal stent placement, performance of direct endoscopic necrosectomy, but the timing on this is really not well evaluated as relates to the best timing. This is a multi-center study, 70 patients. And they were randomized to direct endoscopic necrosectomy at the index exam after a lumen opposing metal stent, or a step-up approach where they came back and did this necrosectomy after no clinical improvement. And lo and behold, they found that the aggressive de novo approach was far better as far as length of hospitalization, decrease of 10 days, although there was no significant difference in treatment success. So move more quickly. I think our interventional endoscopists are certainly going to like this particular approach as far as risk reduction in days in hospital. A couple of studies as it relates to the biome, one from the UCSD folks in San Diego, showing tremendous variation both on a diurnal and seasonal way of the microbiome. This is the American Gut Project from the AGA. They show a dramatic variation on just the day-to-day activities. Time of day makes a tremendous difference, and seasonal differences also make a dramatic difference as it relates to the biome. So when we start to mitigate towards certain biomic signatures, we need to remember what time of day these signatures were procured and wait and see how this transpires in a mitigation strategy. And finally, another one that looked at the microbiome, this time an alteration using a proprietary probiotic. This is a study from Hong Kong looking at patients with long haul COVID, and they found in a double-blind placebo-controlled trial that there was a significant improvement in long-haul symptoms as it relates to GI symptoms, some of the mental fogginess and fatigue. These are all improved with about a 20% advantage over the active, over the placebo. Again, wait and see where this goes. Again, a proprietary probiotic, but it does tell us the biome is involved in these long-haul patients. This was studied in patients before the COVID variant, so we're not sure how this applies to the COVID variant long-haul type specifics. More to be seen, but lots of exciting information at the DDW, and we'll look forward to seeing these move forward to peer review publication. Dr. David Johnson, thanks again for listening.